Donald Trump has been battling criminal and civil cases against him since he left office in 2021. But what happens to all of those cases now that he will be president once again? Well, for that, I want to bring in Elizabeth Wydra. She's a U.S. Supreme Court litigator and president of the Constitutional Accountability Center. Elizabeth, thank you so much for making time for us today.
Sure. Thanks so much for having me on.
So I think this is a big question that came to mind for many people when they saw Donald Trump get reelected was, what happens to his legal troubles? Does he just say goodbye to all of that now? Is there some way where they just sort of disappear for him as president again?
Yes. So, obviously this is uncharted territory, but there are several principles that we do know generally apply. So first, we know going into the election that Donald Trump is a convicted felon from the New York case. That case, the sentencing is supposed to go forward on November 26th. There are also these other cases that have not yet gone to trial and are still in the earlier stages. And so we know a little bit more about what's likely to happen with those cases. So for the federal cases, the January 6th insurrection case, for example, the classified documents case in Florida. In those cases, there is a generally acceptable principle that you cannot prosecute a sitting president. So those do pretty much go away when he takes office. Even putting that principle aside, given that Trump himself would be in charge of the executive branch under which the Department of Justice falls, it's also very likely that he would tell them, drop the charges against me once he got into office. But either way, it is it is certain that the federal cases against Donald Trump will fall away.
And they wouldn't be able to sort of
that continue, and that's a little more unsure.
Okay. With those federal ones, though, they wouldn't be able to just put a pin in them and deal with them, when he's not president anymore, waiting 4 years in order to do that, because then that wouldn't have been handled in an appropriate amount of time, right?
Absolutely. So defendants are entitled to a speedy trial. Certainly putting something on hold for 4 years would not fall into that bucket.
Right. Okay. And then tell us about the civil cases. How do you see those playing out? Because he's got some appeals underway and one case that's still pending as well.
Yeah. So again, once he becomes president, it's very likely that those could not go forward because of this general idea that you don't allow legal proceedings to continue if they would significantly interfere with the president's ability to carry out their duties. And so we have a precedent from the Supreme Court that says that you can't have a civil proceeding if it might interfere with the president's ability to carry out his office. So basically, Donald Trump bet really big on getting out of his legal troubles if he were to win the presidential election. And it looks like that bet paid off for him. Certainly, I think a lot of, maybe the founders of the United States would be scratching their head that the American people elected him to office, given all of that. But the fact is they did. And so that is the answer, is that likely all of his legal troubles will go away.
Okay, tell us about the president's pardon power as well, which I'm not sure if he would need to use it, but you mentioned that he is a convicted felon. He was convicted with those, 34 cases or 34, I wrote it down here, 34 counts, yeah. Thank you, with the documents, the falsified documents. There we go. With that case, though, would he even be able to pardon himself, because that's a state charge?
Yes. So the president's pardon power is generally understood to be very broad. That being said, it does only apply to federal crimes. He does not have authority over the New York State criminal prosecutions or any other state, Georgia, for example, if they went forward with something there. So he couldn't pardon himself for those. Whether he would need to in order to get out of any sentence is certainly, I don't think he would have to do that. But there are rules that are generally ascertainable for how pardons should work through the process. And, if he decided to just, pardon a whole bunch of people, for example, for January 6th insurrection, that would be very unusual because it's supposed to go through this regulated process through the Department of Justice and normal channels. But that being said, President Trump has already signaled that he plans to not really abide by the American Constitution when he takes office. So courts are definitely on notice that they may be called upon to be a check on this president, and we'll see if they can pass that test, live up to their role as an impartial adjudicator of justice.
Yeah, there might be some questions around that coming up, Elizabeth, which we should get into. We'll have to get into it another day, though. We'll have to leave it there for now, but really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much.
That's Elizabeth Wydra. She's a U.S. Supreme Court litigator and president of the Constitutional Accountability Center.